You're listening to the Lead On podcast, where we discuss experiences in the armed forces while exploring lessons from military leaders.
Hey, welcome to another edition of Lead On, Lessons from Military Leaders. I'm David Deary, president of the Enlisted Leadership Foundation, and joining me today is Travis Winfield. Travis is a retired Navy Command Senior Chief. He's also a member of the Enlisted Leadership Foundation Board of Directors. Travis, good morning. How are you today?
Good morning, David. Thanks so much for having me, man. I'm so excited to be here, dude. This is exciting stuff.
Yeah, it is. I'm excited to do this with you. I've been looking forward to this podcast when we get to talk together. I've known you for, over 10 years. I think we really met at a Legacy Academy some years ago when you were on active duty, and I was on active duty.
Right. No, absolutely. When I first met you, I was still like towards the tail end of my career. I was just kind of on command senior chief, and of course, I'm a big networker. But yeah, you gave me an opportunity to help mentor and lead the CPO Legacy Academy before I retired. It was one of the best experience I ever had, which then led to me later on, once I retired, to go stalking you guys so I can become part of the organization.
Yeah, and the value you bring, not just to the Enlisted Leadership Foundation, but the military community as a whole, has something that's been a passion of yours for many years, even before I met you, as I've got to talk to you. So I'd like to talk about that, the value that you continue to give back, as well as why you even chose to mentor at the Legacy Academy, and explore a little bit of what you think the one critical component of leadership that maybe isn't touched upon that centers around security.
hmm Well, David, obviously, when I first joined, my entire life, I've always just been passionate about service and
Hmm.
giving back and just being a humble servant. It's just something I've always been drawn to. And so when, I back, obviously, when I got the opportunity to work with you guys when I was still in active duty, that was just kind of a natural fit. But then now, fast forward, since I've retired now, one of the fundamental things that I've learned since retirement, because, when you retire and you start a whole new, and of course, I've followed down the entrepreneur's path. So I've, run a couple of different businesses. And the one fundamental thing that I've learned that I've just become a true passion of mine is just overall financial health of our military. It's not something that is we don't. It's almost like something that we are afraid to talk about because, quite frankly, most of our leaders in the military aren't very educated themselves. So it's become this kind of topic that we're afraid to talk about because we don't feel educated enough to talk about. So I'm literally going door to door to do just that.
Which, you talk about, or you mention how many times military leaders are afraid to talk about something. Maybe they're afraid to talk about it because they themselves are uncomfortable. But, let me ask you something. Have you ever encountered, just kind of made me think about this. Have you ever encountered somebody uh, who isn't afraid to talk about something and maybe they should be because they gave you some really bad leadership advice?
Well, that's an interesting thing because I think, first off, let me just say, I don't think there's such a thing as bad advice. I think it's advice that you maybe don't want to take because you can always learn from somebody, either what to do or what not to do. But I look at every interaction with anybody I'm ever with as something I can learn from. And so I think one of the biggest things is that I do have is that when you hear from somebody that does talk about a topic that maybe they're just kind of faking it until they make it and they're not really sure what they're putting out, and or should I say, use the term that we use in the Navy, proverbial sea lawyers out there.
Hmm.
I think that's one of the hardest things that I have when I interact with some leaders is that they just don't really do the due diligence of research before they're passing on maybe some advice that that's not exactly accurate. And
Hmm.
it's easy for me to look at somebody and take that information in and kind of block and tackle and say, all right, let me go check that out and realize that the information they put out was wrong. But that's me looking and doing the due diligence to research it. What about all those other sailors that leader put that information out that was maybe inaccurate? He was being a sea lawyer,
Hmm.
and they don't do that. And so now they take it for gospel just due to the position of that leader.
Oh, so true. Is it Ronald Reagan that coined the phrase "trust but verify"? Right? You get it.
Absolutely.
And You know, and you've said many times, and this is a little bit off topic when you talk about empathy, how I've never walked in your shoes, so I don't
Hmm.
I want to understand, but but although understanding is not relating, right? I've not walked in your
Correct.
shoes. And so sometimes uh, when somebody's speaking into our life, giving you that advice, they haven't walked in our shoes. And true too, and you probably as a senior list leader, we never get the full picture, right?
Hmm.
We get part of it, and then we're trying to give advice or recommendations based on a limited amount of information. It's
Absolutely.
really so important to be transparent and to get the best information or the best advice from your leader. You
Hmm.
really need to humble yourself and be transparent. So let's talk about financial readiness and security and transparency. And so I'm
Hmm.
going to ask you uh, to be transparent today
Hmm.
because you weren't always as financially secure as you are right now.
No, David, people say that life is about the journey and you make mistakes along the way. Man, I truly think I have probably made every mistake you can make along my journey because I'm not that kind of guy that listens to somebody. I can actually tell you a story that there was a warrant officer back in my first command on the USS Ticonderoga back in 1992. And this warrant officer found a liking in me, and and he tried to give me advice, like, hey, if you want to try to save, he was trying to you need to invest your money. You need to sit there and maybe drop your taxes. Why give the government a free loan? So drop your exemptions down to maybe two or three, so you're not paying into the government for a free loan, and you can keep that and redeploy that in investments. Back then, I did actually take it advice, but then when I had to pay a tax bill at the end of the year, I lost my mind. Said, I'll never do that
Mm,
again. But now fast forward, gosh, almost 30 years later, I go, holy crap, that was some sound advice. I just didn't have I didn't have the leadership or the mentorship to do follow-up training on how to really do it. I was just kind of blindly taking that one little piece of nugget and trying to execute it without understanding the long-term end game of investments. And that's why I'm so passionate now. And of course, I made every other mistake too. I racked up every credit card bill you can have, $40,000 worth of credit,
mhm.
having to get a consolidation loan to get out of it, working two jobs my entire career just to make ends meet.
Sure.
I was a senior chief petty officer in the Navy working at Best Buy. So I sold security systems. I did everything.
Let me ask you, what is that long-term end game when we talk financial readiness? You are one of the people that we invite into the class to teach a very basic financial readiness class. But what's the end game? Why financial readiness?
Well, I think so. I think it breaks down into three pillars, and I'm going to make this a super super quick Reader's Digest
Sure.
version. So, the three pillars of basic financial health, and I want to preface by saying this is just enough information to get yourself in trouble. But the three basic
Mhm.
pillars are: maintain good credit, invest money into a compound interest account, because the credit's like money in the bank because it's cheaper to borrow money if you need to borrow it, but you have to understand the difference between good credit and bad credit.
Right.
Maintaining investing, and I mean that I cannot emphasize that enough, right? At least 15 to 25% of your income should be going into an investment where you pay yourself first, right?
Hmm.
Because paying yourself first is the critical piece, because if you're paying your bills, pay your bills, don't get me wrong, because that's how you keep good credit, but make sure you pay your investments first, because that investment will make you money in the long run. And here's the crazy power of compound interest. If you just save $200 a month for 10 years and never put a dime in that, and that's about $23,000. If you just let that ride in a compound interest stock account, 401k, TSP, then by the time you're 67, ready to retire, you will have roughly $2.6 million in the bank. And people don't grasp that. And then the last pillar is simply this: it's real estate. And that's because you have to live somewhere. It's one of the few assets that are an appreciating asset. So invest in real estate. Those are the three basic pillars, because we all have to have a place to live, need to invest, and get good credit.
Well, and Mark Twain says, "Buy land because you can't make more of it."
You're right.
Um, and the one thing about compound interest that I think is critically important is the younger you are, because of the thing called the rule of 72. So people can Google rule of 72. You want that 2 point whatever million, you have to start while you're young, right? So
Mm-hmm.
Travis is talking when you're 18, 20, 22 years old, because you have that money in there working for you longer and it's building upon itself. Now, that's not to say when you're 40, 45, 50 years old, if you've never done it because whether A, you never heard about it, B, cars were more important, C, raising kids costs a lot of money. I mean, life happens. Okay, we get it. But even just starting at 40, where you might end up with $500,000, $700,000, that's more than what you had. And the
Absolutely.
other thing with financial readiness is, Travis, it's having 2 million bucks is pretty nice, right? But what about having different lines of income? Wake up money, if you will.
Hmm.
Think
Well,
about it.
I call
You and
that
I are
mailbox money or passive income.
a passive. I mean, you and I are both retired, so
Hmm.
the federal government gives us a check on the first of the month.
Yep.
If you happen to be service connected disabled, there may be a financial aspect to that. We all
Hmm.
pay into Social Security. I, for one, I believe Social Security will never go away. Politically, I just have faith in it. It may not be
Hmm.
as much as it was 15, 20 years ago, but
Sure.
I think there'll be something. But that's
Hmm.
that's income. You mentioned the thrift savings plan. Brad, Travis, let me ask you, why don't you talk for a minute? Because one of my frustrating things with the blended retirement system,
Hmm.
which replaced the high three that you and I are under,
Hmm.
that when we put money into our TSP, whatever money we put in is what we watched grow. Explain now with the blended retirement system and how that's so much different than the high three retirement system, specifically with thrift savings plan.
Well, I mean, again, I'm definitely not the expert in the new model because this all came out after I retired, so I'm not as
Okay.
educated as maybe I should. But do understand the basic concepts. Is they're basically leveraging kind of a 401k concept,
Hmm.
and that you have to you decide how much money you're going to put in there, right? And you can take
Right.
money out or put something in. So the challenge that I have with it is it's leaving it open to these guys to make these financial decisions for their long-term effect. And I think, unfortunately, I think a lot of them are saying, oh, they're thinking now and not 20, 30 years from now. So they're maybe not putting as much money into it as they could or should.
Exactly. So, and I'll just fill in a few holes real quick, if you don't mind. So,
Sure.
when we talk 401k, so a company 401k is a match, right? So a company will say, if you put in 5%, we will match 5%. And that's so there's a maximum amount. You could put in 10%, the company will only match 5. But if you choose to put in 2%, the companies traditionally will only match 2.
Hmm.
So when you look at the thrift savings plan now under the blended retirement system, the federal government matches up to 5%. So if you give 5% and the federal government's 5%, if you read financial advice, they say where you would say, and I would agree with you, 15 to 25%. The norm is 10%. So under blended retirement system, if you're an E1 making 1,500 a month and you put 10% in, $150 a month, and then the government gives another five, now you're at that 15%.
Hmm.
And and I like to use the analogy. Listen, in the military, when do we get our workouts in? Morning, midday, or at the end of the day? And
Hmm.
typically, it's in the morning because if you don't get it done right away, chances are you won't get it done. And
Exactly.
if you look at any good budget plan, any financial plan, you tell me, Travis, when do you take that investment money? When do you take your savings money?
Well, you generally take that. I mean, you always think we always have a tendency, human nature is to pull it when you need to. And the
Yeah.
challenge with that is that we don't, again, we're thinking of the here and now, we're not thinking long term. And so
Hmm.
that causes a challenge sometimes with regards to they're pulling money out and it's not being used. So they'll like say they'll have it in their TSP like, oh, I want to buy a new car, and they'll pull a down payment out of there. But what they don't realize that you're pulling it out of the market. When it's not in
Yeah.
there making money in the market, it's doing you no good. And that actually happened to me. When I retired, I did some refinances and I pulled 50 grand out to pay off a vehicle. Again, I've made every mistake you can. And sure enough, I pulled it out the bottom of the market. So, or excuse me, at the top of the market where the market was just really not doing good. So when I pulled my money out, it took me a long time to get it back in and make as much money had I kept that money still sitting in there. And so it's these little nuances that we just don't have. I just don't believe we have enough education system for that blended retirement for it to be effective long term. My understanding is if you are effective with it, it can be good, but I think the education is going to be our biggest thing. And I think we're going to, quite frankly, deal with a lot of people that do not take care of their finances effectively. And when they're ready for retirement, they're not sitting there with kind of almost like a guaranteed paycheck like we get with the high three.
Hmm. Right. Well, yeah, and when you do take that money to put it in and to leave it, then right, you build that, take that off the top. You don't do your budget and see what you got left over and then say, okay, this is what I
No,
got left, I'll
you
invest.
got to
No,
pay
you
yourself
take it off
first.
right, and then you learn, then you budget around that. And when you promote, you can add to it, things of that nature. Um, it's so you mentioned passive income and businesses. So what do you do now? Now that you're retired?
Oh gosh, what you always ask me is what do I not do? It seems like.
Man, that's true.
So obviously, so I treat my life now kind of like I did in the military. I have my primary duty. My primary duty, if you will, is my real estate company. So I have a real estate company that I run here in Southern California called the Winfield Group, and we are only serving. 99% of our business is serving veterans. So we specialize with serving veterans. Now, on top of that, I'm also a part owner in the brokerage of the real estate company called Century Residential. And we have actually created the first national military first real estate company in the country. So I'm executive with that company. And of course, my collateral duty or my civic duty is, of course, donating my time and efforts to the Enlisted Leadership Foundation, which I just think is that's my heartwarming giving back thing. And then my collateral duty, if you will, is if I didn't have enough to do, I bought a brewery in Marietta called Inland World Brewing Company, and that's so I also have that. So if you want a beer, come out. We still need to get you out there to have a beer with me.
I still got to get out there. But you know what? And yeah, that's a lot of time. And you're a young man, and but you put all this energy in, and again, this is your way to build your future retirement. Whether
Hmm.
you sell off the companies, whether they pay you out, or you work less and continue to benefit from the revenue that comes in. And that model is again very similar to just investing, whether
It
it's
is.
through TSP, 401 company 401ks. Many listen. I don't know too many people honestly, that do their 20 plus years in the military and then don't continue working, whether
Hmm.
they can afford, some maybe can afford to stop working, but I think it's in our nature to remain busy, to remain productive. And I'll
Hmm.
tell you, for those who've never heard of the Institute for Veterans of Military Family out of Syracuse University, that's an organization that Travis introduced me to
Hmm.
3 years ago, shortly after joining the Enlisted Leadership Foundation board, because as we continue to grow as a nonprofit business, and Travis said, David, you should consider some of the programs, and they have specific programs for entrepreneurs. And then this weekend, I just returned from the Veterans Edge Conference, which you've been to
Hmm.
the first three, and this was the fourth. And I will tell you, for those out there listening, I was so blown away, not just by the number of veteran entrepreneurs, but how successful these
Hmm.
veteran entrepreneurs are. The average, there's 250 of us. And this is not me. So I say it's an average, right? So, when you talk average, those up high bring everybody up, okay?
Right.
But the average revenue was over $2 million per company that
Hmm.
was there. I mean, there was companies, veteran-owned businesses, owners that I'm meeting making 20, 30, I don't want to use the word making, with revenues of 20, 30, $40 million a year. I
Hmm.
mean, imagine that. And many of these are like me and you, maybe learned something in the military, because several of them took their skill sets that they
Hmm.
learned in supply chain, whatever, and then was able to take advantage of that. I met
Hmm.
one young sailor, 16-year E6, a week ago yesterday. He went on terminal leave. He got out. 16 years. You know how many people probably said to him he's crazy? But yet he owns a very successful coffee company in Georgia. And he had to get out because he's doing so. He's like you. So again, financial readiness.
And let me just touch on that too. That fact that
please.
if you have, even if anybody's listening to this and you can have an inkling, look, entrepreneurship is not for everybody. Okay, there's a lot of risk that's involved with it. There's a lot of falling on your face involved with it. But I do say this: look, the average small business has an 80% failure rate. But you'll find that veteran entrepreneurs have a much higher success rate because one of the biggest issues that small businesses have is discipline to build processes. And guess what we do in the military every day? We are built around discipline and building processes and procedures. So it's a natural transition, actually, to get into entrepreneurship and building businesses. So if I just absolutely think that program and all that can really incite. And by the way, they're free.
It's free. It's free. It's great. So your best, well, we are pretty much out of time, but I like to close with a final question, Travis. As leaders, the higher up we go, we're making more decisions. It's expected of us to make decisions. Has there ever been a time that you made a really bad decision, but it had a positive outcome?
So I say this one because it's still active, and it was, if you were to talk to anybody, what do they always say? Never mix business and pleasure, right?
Pleasure. Yep.
So I think one of my best, and if you were going to use the industry norm as a mistake, was I hired my son to join my business. And, a lot of outsiders like, how's that going to work? And all that. And I tell you what, it has been an absolute godsend with my business. We've actually become closer working together. So I think that's probably my, and again, I don't call it a mistake. But if you were to talk a lot of people about how, normally if you mix family and business, or friends and business, it rarely works out. In this case, it has turned into be an absolute fantastic mistake, if you want to call it, because our business has literally doubled since he's joined the company.
That's exciting. That's awesome, Travis. So again, that's a great example of how a risky decision could have had a negative outcome. Probably many people told you it was not a good decision, and but you stuck with it. Well, listen, Travis, again, I want to thank you. Thank you for your service, first and foremost. Thank you for being a friend. Thank you for all you do, giving back to the Enlisted Leadership Foundation. And thank you for being a small business owner that's benefiting the United States economy, as well as those military and veterans that you get to work with, both as real estate agents, as well as those whose homes you get to help buy and in some cases sell.
Well, David, it's an absolute pleasure, bro. I really do appreciate you as well, man. This is why we're obviously cut from the same cloth and a lot of things we do. And I just value our friendship and everything that we do. So let's keep on kicking ass and taking names and keep paying it forward.
Works for me. Once again, I'm David Deary. This has been Lead On, Lessons from Military Leaders, put on to you by the Enlisted Leadership Foundation. We are a nonprofit business with the sole goal of building America's leaders. Tune in next time when we drop on the 1st and the 15th military paydays of every month. Take care and lead on.